say rendered ineffective? Like,
Okay.
can you
Yeah.
further explain what you mean by that?
Right. Basically, when I started my research, I was looking at these frauds, and then I in turn looked to the Code of Professional Conduct, and actually just returned to the library. But one of my sources that I used to kind of make the comparisons was actually a copy of the Code of Professional Ethics from 1956 that we happen to have a copy of. And when I was kind of reading through it, I realized that that pretty much all the principles and most of the rules have remained pretty much the exact same. So that kind of made me think of this, of like the code is kind of just really becoming just almost a PR piece and not really something that's actually followed. So that's kind of why I feel like it was just rendered ineffective in that we had like the code from 1956. It was pretty much unchanged up until these frauds in 2002, and then we have Sarbanes-Oxley, and we see a dramatic decrease in these frauds. And so I was kind of connecting it to basically the Code of Professional Conduct being ineffective and Sarbanes-Oxley actually coming in and making a change because we weren't really monitoring it all along.
Were you surprised by that? There wasn't much of a change?
I actually was. I thought that all of like the consulting and like performing consulting services as well as audit services was going to kind of just be like totally fine in the 1956 code. But all the principles cover, really talk about that professional skepticism still maintaining your integrity, even, in what services you perform. There's a whole section in that old code about, not subordinating your judgment to others. I thought it was interesting that basically even back to that code, it would, if you were following that, you would kind of see that it wasn't a good idea to be performing those types of services, especially to that magnitude.
When was the last time that was checked out before you actually took that out?
It was actually checked out in like 2009, I think.
Oh, wow.
And there were a bunch of notes written in it, so I don't know.
Was there a layer of dust that you had disturbed?
Yeah, just all the pictures yellow. So.
I have a question. What I was wondering about is this code originally goes back, well, you mentioned 1956, but does it go back to the early 20th century?
Yeah, the first code was 8 rules. It was published in 1917.
Now, the question I have is this: it took until well, the 1980s, it seems, before this was broken. Now, the reason broken in a substantive way, is it just that things were overlooked before the 1980s, abuses, say, of the code, or ignoring the code, violations of the code, whatever the right phrasing is there, or why was it that the code didn't have problems before? Because people, I take it as this is just a sign of human sinfulness as a theologian, and I'm sure there was human sinfulness in 1920 as well as there is in 2013 or 14. Do you have any explanation for that?
I thought about that. I kind of I really likened it to how fast that basically businesses grew in the United States, and kind of how fast the accounting profession was changing, and the code not really keeping up to that progressive change. So there were all these changes in generally accepted accounting principles all throughout, but the code kind of stayed the same. And I think that that the code was kind of left behind when everything else was really changing.
What would be some of the things that would have been changing that you would say are significant changes?
Well, I would say one, the use of technology, I think, has played a big role in these audits, and how and how audits are done, more or less. But just in that all, as the technology has changed, it just made these audits much more complex, and then it made it basically made these firms able to conduct more in-depth audits on these huge companies that they weren't able to do before, but they weren't really able to get as in-depth into this.
So maybe what happened was there were frauds going on before.
Probably. I'm sure that there were. I just don't think that it was to the magnitude that we saw.
Yeah, it's probably scale, right? As far as the impact and
right.
How people viewed them.
Also the information. Talked a bit about that, the availability of information.
Right.
So much more accessible than it
Oh.
was
Oh, I see.
earlier on too. That you didn't hear as much about it, as you said, to the impact.
Right.
No. No. You wanna ask?
Yeah, I know you, in the paper too, you talked more about the need for rules, or apparent need for rules to go along with that, the code itself and its generalities seems to be where the profession has gone a bit in
Mhm.
the PCOB and some of the other clarifications, yes.
Right.
Any thoughts on how that is that working, or is it played out, or should there be the need to clarify?
I really saw like all of the inclusion of these really specific rules as more or less, just kind of putting a Band-Aid on the issue, and that so it was basically said in the 1956 code that you shouldn't that you shouldn't perform services that are going to impede your your independence.
Mhm.
And then so then we have the frauds in the early 2000s, like the example with Enron and Arthur Anderson. And then we basically then have a rule that says that, you can't do consulting and auditing for the same client, when really it was just kind of there before. So I kind of see the rules as more or less just, not, the rules just kind of, as kind of putting a Band-Aid on the issue, or trying to increase the compliance, but I don't think that it actually changes how these, how these firms really view them. Did that answer?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we need to have it like all spelled out.
Right.
Every single detail, or someone have a loophole.
We either have to have it all spelled out, or basically bring up these accountants that will kind of follow the kind of spirit of the rules more than just what the rules specifically say.
Any of our other guests want to ask a question or to say, make a comment? Yes, go ahead.
Well, I had a more personal question. Can you go back a couple slides? Other way.
Forward.
Yeah, forward. One more. Yeah, that one. One of the middle points about like the college graduates having like a higher score on ethics tests. Does that make you nervous entering?
Not with my education from Canisius, because like I said, how the New York State requirements require that ethics be kind of baked into these courses, and I think that Canisius has done a good job at doing that. Otherwise, I don't think I would even be moved to write such a thesis about ethics in the accounting profession.
Are there things in place that, because I'm not exactly familiar with this, I'm finance, so what are some of the safeguards that would allow you as just a graduate who may for the first couple of years still be fearful of losing a job and speak out?
Well, in some ways, that's almost I mean, in the past, it's kind of been left up to these accounting firms to really, kind of this tone at the top mentality where where the higher ups in these firms need to really just push that ethics is of vital importance, as they're bringing in these first years. I think that it kind of goes back to, how we are as freshmen at college, and we're kind of looking up to the seniors. It's the same, it's the same way. So I think it comes, a lot of it, because it hasn't really been required through all facets of education. I think that a lot of it actually comes down to whether or not these firms can really support that culture.
Concerning that study, Mike, is there a huge gap between accounting students and other students? or is
They
it
didn't
pretty-
say specifically. They said they were using REST's defining issues test,
Okay.
which I don't know much about, just from what I've researched though. But basically it ranks individuals on 6 levels, and they were saying that that accountants were typically falling in the 3 to 4 range, which kind of ties back into this following the rules. But there was a whole hierarchy where it comes down to basically where at the bottom is basically doing what's best for only you, and at the top it's doing what's best for you and everyone else. And kind of in the middle is just kind of following the rules.
Which really kind of highlights the fact that maybe a principles-based or a spirit-based approach might not really work as well. We have to get them off that approach somehow. Because if it's a follow the rules kind of mentality.
Right.
you almost have to spell things out more. Yeah.
Right.
Which makes things,
Right,
it's
yeah.
troubling though.
Yeah. It's a little bit disheartening.
If I may interrupt, that sounds like accountants in one sense, they're very precise.
Yes.
Very precise, at least the ones I've encountered, and they want to know exactly what is
Yes.
going on. It's the culture.
What do I need to do?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the litigation also, as it came up, cemented, or supported that as well,
Oh,
because
okay.
if you're gonna litigate and you have very subjective areas, it does make it more challenging.
Right.
I mean, our standards are similar to that as well.
May I ask, I was thinking about this independence in fact and independence in appearance. That seemed, even in your paper, I said, this is sort of interesting, and I don't exactly know, I guess really the way it ends up is independence in appearance is more important than independence in fact, at least in terms of your, of the work. I don't know whether,
Right.
it seemed to me it should be just the opposite now. I don't know if you know much about that at all, or?
Well, I mean, that really comes back to like kind of how you can almost measure like how independent that you seem, but you really can't. You can't measure how independent that you are in your mind. You know, it's kind of like a like father that's coaching his son's soccer team, and when he chooses to put his son in the game, is he choosing him because he's independent in fact and that he's actually the best person to go in, or is he doing it because it's his son? So really, you can only see that his independence in appearance is violated by him coaching his son. Does that make it any clearer?
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking independence. In fact, I would say, well, we can see whether people have a conflict of interest. For example, if Arthur Anderson is consulting at the same time as they are auditing, I would say that's probably a question of independence of fact, because I could look, as it turned out, you could see that they were probably being biased in that situation, and maybe also in appearance, because you say, hey, something may be awry or amiss here. And again, it may not be. It may be completely honest, above board. They aren't having any conflicts of interest, or one group is paying off or forcing the other group to do something different. But that's just the way I was surprised by those terms. Let's put it that way. I think we're everybody ready to be on your way. Well, Mike, do you prefer Mike or Michael? I don't know.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
I respond to both.
You respond to both.
We
all
call
right.
Mikey at home, so.
Mikey, all right.
That's not gonna change, just so you know.
You think you did it? Well,
Not for
that's
me,
pretty-
anyway.
With, that would be a conflict. But you can give us your evaluation sometime. Are you an accountant yourself, by the way?
Me?
Yes.
No, I'm the director of business development
Oh.
at Superior Lubricants, our family company.
Oh, I see.
So,
Oh, all right.
yeah.
So this is another thing.
It is a family thing, yeah, that's why I recorded him, that he didn't know that I was gonna do that, but our parents couldn't be here, they're in Florida, they're on their way back, so.
Oh, okay. Oh, my goodness.
Snowbirds now, yeah.
Snowbirds, yeah. Well, that's what happens.
It's a good year to be a snowbird.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, well.